Good evening. I would like to call the meeting to order now for the purpose of electing a chair, and I will now accept nominations for the position of chair. Councillor Sanik.
Thank you. I want to nominate Councillor Canton, please.
And Councillor Candon, do you accept the nomination?
I do.
And may I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Bohm. Are there any other nominations to come forward at this time? Councillor Bohm.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Osanik as vice chair.
We're just going to deal with the chair first, and then we'll get to vice chair in a second. So seeing no other nominations for the position of chair, I will close the nominations and ask for the committee to vote on the appointment of Councillor Candon as chair. So all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. And while Councillor Candon gets set up, I'll just ask for a nomination for the position of vice chair, which I believe Councillor Bohm might put forward. And Councillor Arnold, you'll second that. And that was for Councillor Osanik to be vice chair. Are there any other nominations at this time? Seeing none, I'll close nominations. And all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries.
Thank you. This is my first time chairing a meeting, so it could be a bit of a bumpy road, but I'm glad I get to do it with all you guys. So we have quorum. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Do we have an approval of the agenda? With the addendum. What's that?
So when they vote, you just vote with the addendum. So you're okay, just by what you said.
Okay. Do we have a confirmation of the minutes?
Just need to vote on the addendum. So we need to go for a second.
Okay. Do we have a mover and seconder on the addendum? Councillor Bohm? Councillor Osanik?
Sorry, so you'll vote. So now they'll vote on the agenda with the addendum. So you have a mover and seconder. So you just need to say all those in favor and opposed.
So just all those in favor and opposed?
Yeah, just for Councillor Stroud's benefit, just mention you're voting on the agenda with the addendum.
Okay. Okay.
Just sorry to answer your question, Councillor Stroud. The committee is now voting on the agenda with the addendum, which includes an alteration to the first delegation and the inclusion of the other two items on the addendum, which are both delegations.
All in favor? Opposed? Carries unanimously. Do we have a confirmation of the minutes? Councillor Sanik and Councillor Stroud? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Do we have any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move to delegations, which we'll see on the addendum. First up is Ms. Susan Reed will present to speak to the committee regarding a review of a noise bylaw.
Actually, can we do Chris first, like we have?
Okay, just, I can ask.
That's okay.
And you asked me if they could send switch A and B around. So Christopher Spencer and Susan Reed.
Okay. Can I ask the committee to review to switch A and B around? Yeah, thank you. So Christopher Spencer will be speaking to the committee regarding the review of the noise bylaw.
Great, thanks. You guys hear me okay? Okay, great. All right, so I'm Christopher Spencer. Thanks for the time. So I'm here to voice my concerns, actually, with respect to this noise bylaw. My family has resided on the street in Kingston for close to 18 years. 13 of those years, I've been raising an 11 and a 13-year-old, so it's been a great neighborhood to live in. The past few years have been more challenging between light and sound that's been intruding into our neighborhood, and that would include Gibson and College Streets. It's been more challenging. So it's been a good neighborhood. I understand the need for athletics and physical fitness. I get that. I have an undergraduate degree in kinesiology and a master's in exercise physiology, so I'm physically fit. My family is physically fit. We do a lot of biking. My wife bikes to work. My kids walk to school. So I understand the need for varsity teams to use the fields, but not necessarily at the expense of the neighborhoods and the disruption of those neighborhoods through sound. So I know a number of these groups, Queens, West Campus, and St. Lawrence, want to expand the use of their fields. Maybe not so much for varsity use, but more for revenue generating uses when it comes to bringing in outside groups to use their fields. And as you can see, both my kids play competitive soccer, and they've used many of these fields throughout Kingston. They've been playing competitive soccer for 6 years now. And at no point under the current noise bylaw in Kingston have my kids been denied playing space within the city of Kingston, or any other field for that matter. So there seems to be a perception and a false dilemma, I think, being proposed that should certain groups within the city not get the exemptions to these bylaws, that their activities are going to grind to a halt, and that couldn't be more false. So I want to make you aware of that. So I'm here to voice my concerns for a noise bylaw that gives protections to the user groups of these spaces and sacrifices the rights of those neighborhoods, to which I am one living in, around them. So I think currently 9 p.m. is a reasonable compromise for users of these spaces, and it balances the rights of the surrounding neighborhoods. If user groups were willing to implement noise abatement technologies such as sound berms or sound walls, or a combination of both, then I more than likely wouldn't be standing here talking to you tonight about this. So I did review 20 noise bylaws from cities throughout Ontario, and I went and I called and I talked to their people, and I got their bylaws. And so many restrict the following. It's the operation of any electronic device, so amplified sound, and it's event-specific and event-driven in terms of whether or not you can use loudspeakers at events. The second part is the operation or use of whistles, horns, and sirens, and I would suspect that includes shouting. And they run anywhere from 9 o'clock at night to 10:30 as a stop time, to 7 a.m. the next morning, or 9 o'clock on statutory holidays and weekends. So as I said, groups using these fields have not managed the impacts of sound in the surrounding neighborhoods. So my ask of you is that until these groups that are responsible for these fields consider noise abatement technologies as part of their plans to mitigate the travel of noise into the surrounding neighborhoods, don't include amplified sound, be it loudspeakers or PA systems, as acceptable use. It should be event-specific and approved as such. So the new noise bylaw, I think, was going to create a noise bylaw ghetto if it goes through. There'll be second-class residential zones around these various venues. So I ask you to reconsider what's being proposed and protect the integrity of these neighborhoods and the surrounding areas. And I ask you to continue to uphold the 9 p.m. standard until such time as these groups implement or get serious about noise abatement technologies. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wondered about, you'd mentioned St. Lawrence was going to start using their fields for revenue generating. Do you know who they're going to bring?
I don't. I was referring more to Queen's University and the Queen's West Campus sports complexes. I know in my case, with my kids having played soccer on the Nicholas McCartney fields and Tyndall fields, that they've paid extra through their association. So each of my kids have paid $150 extra as a means to get access to those fields. So I do know when, I can go back 3 or 4 years when we had a lighting issue with Queen's University and West Campus, that their master plan, their two key tactics in their master plan for revenue for the university was one, it was alumni activation, and second, it was sports fields use through rental agreements. So I'm referring specifically to Queens in that case.
Okay, you did mention St. Lawrence, so I was very interested.
So yeah, amend the record for revenue generating.
And the other one is adequate sports fields. Have you heard of pickleball?
Have I heard of
Pickleball.
pickleball?
Pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the city of Kingston, and we are getting massive requests for pickleball courts. So we do actually not have enough sports fields. I know it's an unusual name, but it's a huge sport in the town that's played mostly by adults. Anyway, I just thought I'd see if you knew about that one, because we've got added
No, I don't.
pressure.
I just, relative to what my kids play, which is mostly soccer and the field use of soccer, through the association that they play with, they've never been denied use of a field based on the current noise bylaw.
Councillor Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. So in terms of your presentation, the last two slides, you shared with us some examples of other bylaws, and then your ask appears to be to have the proponents use noise abatement infrastructure rather than bylaw enforcements. But my brief look at the bylaw that you demonstrated was that the fields were still able to be used after 9 p.m., but certain noise uses, amplified sound, whistles, or other types of things were not allowed to be used based on what I saw briefly in that slide there. So I'm trying, I guess you were saying that this was a great example of what other municipalities are doing, but then you sort of pointed us towards another direction for action. So I'm just looking for some clarity about what you think should be done here.
So certainly with the other cities that I looked at, the use of whistles, for example, or shouting in that case, or gongs or sirens was limited to a specific time in terms of time of day and restrictions. So let's say 9 a.m. at night or 9 p.m. at night till 7 a.m. in the morning. When I looked at those cities as well, the restriction on amplified sound was more event-driven in terms of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there was a restriction on loudspeakers and amplified noise on these spaces. You could apply for it, and you could get a permit for it, and I guess in that case be exempted for it. So that was my point, was that under the current noise bylaw, things seem to be fine. I'm not sure why we need to extend it or move beyond where we're at right now. Certainly for my neighborhood, I mean, we've been dealing with noise off of those pitches, and Queens has moved probably the most noisy groups, lacrosse being one of them, to other fields that they currently use. And so, you can move a team like that down to Tyndall Field, and it's not going to impact the neighborhood near as much because 75% of that field is surrounded by Queen's University's buildings and not residential properties. So in our neighborhood, the shift in management of that has moved to other fields.
Councillor Stroud?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Spencer. So when you said it was 18 years you've lived on Oak Ridge, when you bought your home, what was the state of the Nicholas McCartney field?
It was a parking lot. So actually, there was two big parking lots that were there, and they were shuttling McCoy buses back and forth to KGH and the Queen's main campus. So the majority of people that were working at KGH were actually parking out there and being shuttled downtown. And so at no point actually in the consultation process, and I guess I can thank Mayor Harvey Rosen for this, that whole area, from what I understand, was rezoned educational. So there was no requirement on the part of Queen's University to make the residences aware of the fact that things were going to change. And so in the essence of one summer, it actually went from a parking lot to a sports field with broadcast lighting. And so we were completely unaware of that, both sides of the street. I can talk for Yonge Street as well on the other side. And then I recognized too that, Queens rebuilt their stadium, and we knew that was coming. But certainly those two fields, the Nicholas McCartney field and the field directly west to it, which is the all grass field, that was a parking lot.
And you mentioned the the light and that there was mitigating, the university changed the lighting system at Nicholas McCarney since the inception of the field, and it was a positive change. Could you just expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a few consultations with Queen's University at that time, and the lighting is not the same on that field as it is at, say, Tyndall or Nixon Field. This is a lighting that gives it a FIFA F1 rating, I believe, so that you can do broadcasts on it. And that was lighting up the entire neighborhood at the time. So they did provide hoods for the lights. They redesigned the hoods. They didn't have hoods on them actually at the start, and they put hoods on them, and they did some re-aiming. So that has brought the light down in the neighborhood. It's still lit. There's no doubt about that. It's less than it was, for sure.
So that sort of leads to my next question. Do you feel that the university could, if they wished, install sound barriers, berms, walls, or whatever, along that field, which is the field in Kingston with the closest proximity to residential? Do you think that they could, if they so chose, to install circumstances that would actually make evening use past 9 p.m. Okay with you and other residents on Oak Ridge?
Absolutely. I don't think I'd be standing here if that was the case. I wouldn't be here talking about having a 9 p.m. curfew. Run your fields to 10:30, 11 o'clock at night if you have sound abatement technology in place. I've read enough online and learned enough about it, and I know Queens. My dad's a former graduate of 2 degrees from the engineering school in Queens, and I'm sure they're smart enough, hopefully brave enough to undertake that and understand that you can put sound berms and you can combine it with maybe a sound wall to abate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Our next delegation is Susan Reed, who will be present to speak to the committee regarding a review of noise bylaw supplementary report.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Sue Reed, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Sydenham District Association. A noise is a noise is a noise. One of the things that came out of the report was this statement, which sort of summarizes the purpose of why the number of the changes were proposed. And staff deems it beneficial to establish a set of noise regulations specific to facilitating organized sporting events, while also managing the impacts of this activity that they may have on residents. It certainly achieves the first aim in these suggestions, but it utterly fails in the second one. The changes would exempt all the noise of any type from all activities on these fields for basically all waking hours of the day. And for the first time, it would make daily use of amplified sound and loudspeakers part of our residential landscape. The proposed management strategy appears to be that there's actually nothing left to enforce. It would be pretty much 98% exempt. It would give these fields a special as-of-right exemption from virtually all civil restrictions on noise generation. And it proposes qualitative measures. These ones have been proven ineffective against certain institutions. 3 years ago, the city cited Queens for repeatedly breaking noise bylaws, with problems with some teams yelling and hollering at night, banging goalposts with lacrosse sticks on their fields. And after reoccurrences and complaints with no change, Queens was informed that the city would be proceeding to charges. Eventually, there were no charges. They never paid any fines. And where are we now? Here we are back again, fighting against complete exemption for all sports field noise in residential areas. Effective noise management requires that there be some real protection from the impact of the known adverse effects. The bylaw officers with qualitative measures aren't going to be empowered when they're dealing with the problems on the fields because they can't assert any standard. It's always going to be their opinion against the institutions, the operators, in assessing things like loudspeaker volume. Currently, what's stated in the report suggests that the yardstick would be as loud as is needed. The report's main argument to level the playing field, to harmonize the rules between city fields and these fields. The presumptions in this are that the city is exempt from all noise bylaw restrictions and that operation until 10:30 requires exemption from noise bylaws. The actual situation is that city field user agreements include a commitment to abide by all the bylaws, and noise is included. And the city manages from a position of responsibility and accountability to citizens. It's a different mechanism, but it has the same standards. The city enforces noise infractions by relocation and discussion and by refusing to rent facilities to repeat offenders. For example, there's your pickleball issue where the people around Henderson Park were being bothered by the pickleball noise, and pickleball was moved because the city does manage in order to control noise. And groups on these fields are free to use them until 10:30 if the noise doesn't impact the neighbors unduly. The World Health Organization, these are conclusions based on a number of studies. Sleep is a biological necessity. Environmental noise damages human health, particularly at night when it interrupts sleep. There is sound evidence that night noise increases heart rate, causes changes in sleep state, increases medicine usage. It's related to hypertension, heart attacks, depression, fatigue, and accidents, and these are facts, and these are why the Environmental Protection Act in Ontario is written as it is. Children, shift workers, elderly, the ill, pregnant people, well, mostly women, are the most vulnerable. The sports fields that are to be exempted under this are almost exclusively institutionally zoned properties, and an institution zone dedicated to institutionally related uses. Recreational facilities are also permitted in support of the student body recreational needs. And the noise zoning for these properties, residential, because institutional usage is presumed to be compatible with most noise-sensitive zoning that we have. So what's happened? It's a result of institutional decisions to leverage their institutional zoning to maximize some opportunities for third-party revenue generation. Institutional zoning is now being used to insert multi-field outdoor sports entertainment venues into residential areas, and that's why we're having conflicts. The facilities are being built with no noise containment or noise mitigation, and the results? We have excessive noise and/or light pollution that's spilling into people's homes and lives, and there's frustration on all sides. Institutions discover they're still governed by the residential noise bylaws, and here we are today, with changes proposed that would gut the noise bylaw for thousands of residents because it applies not only to a couple of fields, but to fields across the city. Permitting unlimited acoustic sound, loudspeakers, unlimited occurrences, an extension of all of this into every waking hour for affected residents. It's simply indefensible. This change to the noise bylaw would fail to meet the minimum legal duty under the EPA. This is a requirement on all of us to prevent adverse health effects from noise emissions, and it fails to ensure a reasonable ability for residents to enjoy their own properties. Strife will continue because the situation will be untenable for many nearby neighbors and residents. And besides, removing people's bylaw protection to make it legal to use them badly, it never really brings about much civic peace. I suggest there's a real solution here. It's the quantitative standard. Set aside this report. The proposed exemptions and the change from 9:30 to 10:30 will gut the noise bylaw. Going forward, it'll make it even next to impossible to refuse other parties who apply for similar exemptions. Create a quantitative standard based on NPC 300, just as the municipalities are encouraged to do by the Ministry of the Environment. Those standards are concrete and they give very good guidelines, and they're specifically the purpose that they were created for is to help support municipalities in creating this. The facilities managers would then have a firm target that would allow the design of solid noise barriers, and then we could allow limited temporary exemptions while the operators work to incorporate effective solid sound containment. The neighbors would also be adequately protected, while the activities with proper management of noise intensity could run as often and as late as needed. If the city accepts this report, it would fail to regulate the emission of noise as an environmental pollutant, and it will badly fail its citizens. Kingston needs a real, sustainable solutions, and below you see a couple of samples that can be quite attractive of different types of noise barriers. Our ask is to please set aside the report and to create a quantitative noise standard for these sports fields based on NPC 300, exactly as municipalities are encouraged to do so by the Ministry of the Environment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Stroud?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you've had, under the current bylaws, what kind of chronology can you tell us about your, if you've ever made complaints about noise before, and what was the response, and if you thought that the system was adequate?
Yes, I have made complaints under the existing noise bylaw. The city initially responded. As we said, we were the people that were involved in the original complaints 3 years ago, with lacrosse teams playing at 10:30 at night, and you could hear them in our living room. We'd be sitting in the living room, and you could hear it. We can read from the report where the bylaw officers showed up in our front yard, in the street that's not even close to the field, on the opposite side of the house, and they could clearly hear the yelling from standing in the street in front of our house. And when they moved to the backyard, it was even that much more intrusive. So yes, we have had experience, and that's the acoustic noise at night, not even getting into the issues around amplified sound. We had a number of issues later when the Nicholas McCartney Field was rented to the semi-pro team, the Kingston FC, and we had a lot of amplified sound, and when that was combined with Queen's own use, we had over 18 hours of amplified sound and announcements coming into our house and yard on one weekend. We called the police that weekend, but they told us that it was going to be over soon, so they wouldn't bother responding. We have called the noise line that Queens has set up when we were being bothered by, we don't call every day by any means, but when we were being bothered by excessive noise from their fields, and we were told that, well, it was a scheduled event and that they had an exemption. This was at a time when they did not have an exemption. So I have tried the Queen's helpline or the Queen's noise bylaw line, or noise line, several times, but I haven't had much resolution except to get a call back the next day. But at the time, it doesn't resolve the noise issue. So yes, there's been a bit of an ongoing history of escalating sound.
Thank you. And my second question is, have you mentioned directly to Queens the option of putting up sound barriers, and what was the response?
I have on a number of occasions, and I believe the quote was, "We've done enough." That was the response. They were not at that moment considering it. Richardson Stadium, you can see through the seats, like they're still open air, so there is no effective noise containment. And I know the people on Yonge Street who've appeared before, a number of you people before, to speak to the noise issues coming from the heavy use of the activities in that area. I know that they've been terrifically impacted.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Our third delegation is Mr. Kevin Seeley from Creative Display. He'll be speaking to the committee regarding review of sign bylaw number 2009-140.
Well, this is my first time ever being to one of these, so I'll do my best here. My name is Kevin Seeley. I'm with Creative Display Technologies. We're a local sign company. I wanted the opportunity to speak tonight. Basically, as we know, there's a bylaw and there's been some changes proposed, and I just need to work to understand the rules a little better to make sure that we work within those rules. And my primary objective is to make sure I understand those rules, and that again we can work with them day to day and make sure that we're not causing any troubles. I printed out, again, I didn't come with a big PowerPoint, but I do have 6 points that I wanted to go over. But I thought, based on timing, I wasn't sure how long we have. There's 2 primary things I would like to discuss or bring up, and then I was hoping to leave a handout that would cover off some of the other points that could be looked at a later time if that's permitted. The first thing I'd like to bring up is the definition of a billboard and a wall sign are not consistent. A billboard sign is defined as an off-premise sign, and a wall sign is defined as an on-premise sign. Therefore, a billboard can never be mounted on a wall or a building, and a wall sign can never be used for third-party advertising. I think this can be easily remedied by permitting a wall sign to be defined as an off-premise sign as well. So simply within the definition of the bylaw, by adding that, that would take care of that particular problem. The other element I wanted to bring up that was of a bigger concern for us was under section 2.2 of the bylaw, which states the bylaw exempts any sign displayed by the city or on behalf of the city from the bylaw. Section 7 in the bylaw prohibits signs that are roof signs, portable signs, billboard signs, flag signs, off-premise signs, and electronic spectacular signs displayed in the business improvement area. This is strictly prohibited. The city does sell advertising and competes with the private sector. As drafted, the bylaw would allow the city to directly compete with the private sector for third-party advertising and do so without complying with the bylaw. So I wanted to create a bit of a picture, if you will, to kind of see where this impacts us. The city potentially could install a large digital billboard on the roof of the wall of the British Whig building, right in the center of the BIA. They could run full motion video. They could sell advertising to companies such as Tim Hortons, Molson's, or even Walmart, which was completely prohibited. These rules were put in place we feel these rules were put in place to control the spread of signs in the Kingston Historic District. So if the city is exempt from these rules, it creates an unfair playing field between the city and private enterprise. And if the bylaw is in place for the good of the people, the rules should apply to all, including the city and private enterprise. The rules should be applied to all users equally, is how we feel. So those are the two things that I wanted to bring up this evening and to bring to your attention. And then, like I said, I have 4 other elements, but they're quite lengthy, and I thought I would maybe just leave that as a handout that someone could maybe look over at a later date, if I can give that to James. Thank you. That was it? Unless, did you want to?
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Stroud.
Do you have, is it maybe in here, the specific request of what changes you would like to see in this bylaw review?
We did make some recommendations when we met, and I'd like to also thank Lisa, who we've been working with the city. Both of us have actually met and discussed different suggestions. I think they're included in the document that everyone had. So there is recommendations for distances. There is recommendations, as we suggested, that the bylaw apply to the city as well as it applies to us. So we have made some recommendations in terms of distances and things like that.
Another question may be completely off the mark, but I've been hearing rumors that were a little concerning. Do you know anything about the rumor about lighting up the side of the Princess Tower building with an advertisement?
I have not heard anything about that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
All right.
Moving on to report number 8, business. I'll ask for the committee clerk to explain the item A in regards to receiving the agenda.
So just for clarification, the committee first gave consideration to the noise bylaw review at the September 8th meeting. During the meeting, the committee deferred this matter in order for staff to conduct additional consultation. Staff has conducted the consultation, which we'll be speaking to in greater detail in a moment. However, at this point, we're seeking the consent of the committee to for the withdrawal of business item A, as this matter will be discussed in greater detail in business item B.
Do we have consent among the committee to withdraw this? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Okay. Moving on to item B, review of noise bylaw. Could I get a introduction from staff on this report?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you may recall in the September 8th meeting of this committee, the noise bylaw was considered and deferred. Committee members asked that staff engage in more public consultation, specifically with respect to noise generated from sports fields throughout the city. So we've gone away and taken the committee's direction, and we did consult. We had a public open house at Portsmouth Olympic Harbor on November 7th. And we also invited the community to communicate their comments and concerns to us directly by mail or email. So we got a reasonably good response. We wanted to ensure that residents residing within close proximity to sports fields were aware of this report, were aware of our recommendations, and were aware of the opportunities to provide comments. So to that end, we employed what's used with respect to the Planning Act amendments, and we mailed approximately 2,000 letters to residences with addresses within 120-meter radius of 25 sports fields that we selected. There are actually more if you count every public school yard, that kind of thing. But we picked the top 25 sports fields based on the facilities that existed there, the amount of activities, programming that takes place there. And it appears that that was effective in terms of garnering additional consultation from the community that we had not heard from to date. Particularly, we list in the report the various fields that we did hear from, or residents that live in proximity to the fields. And it's quite a cross-section across the municipality, both the city's own fields as well as sports fields on private property. So staff took that feedback into consideration and deliberated on that. You'll notice in the report that we're recommending that that the recommendations contained in the September report stand in terms of the regulations we're proposing, the more permissive regulations we're proposing for allowing noise at sports fields when it is generated by organized sporting activities. And I think that's one important factor to emphasize, that I'd like to emphasize, is that it's a very narrow focus in terms of what we're proposing that more permissive regulations pertain to. That is on sports fields as we have defined it in the report, and more specifically with organized sporting activities, as opposed to just any informal pickup games that might, or activities that might occur on a sports field. So organized sporting activities, certainly on the city fields, those are ones that are engaged in under an agreement with the city, and certain restrictions and rules that follow with that user agreement. That was the focus of our most recent consultation. There is an additional added request to amend the bylaw that came to our attention in the intervening time between September, and that is a minor adjustment to our noise bylaw map. As you may be aware, the map separates the city into residential areas and other areas in the context of the noise bylaw. And so it follows from that some types of noise are more permissive or more restrictive depending on whether it's residential or other. There is a section of properties along King Street West that are occupied by condominium complexes now. When the bylaw map was drawn in 2004, that area was declared, or designated rather, an other area being something with more permissive noise regulations, more akin to a commercial or industrial land use. So we're just updating that and correcting that anomaly to request that it be converted to residential to fit with the current land use.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Oops. Having just joined the committee, I did try to delve into this more than I would have. So I'm taking a look, in terms of amplified noise, you can make announcements, but there's no running commentary. That was one of the things that I read, that you're not going to ever be able to have somebody doing a play-by-play running commentary through amplified noise.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. It's defined as intermittent game-related PA announcements. So a running play-by-play commentary is not envisioned to be included in that more permissive regulation.
And the other would be something like an air horn. Any kind of Uzulu, whatever it's called, air horn, yes, would not be allowed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. The noise that would be permitted to be generated from spectators or participants would be limited to yelling, shouting, hooting, singing, and whistling, but not through the use of air horns or other instruments. And I may add that actually is a prohibition at City Fields under our sports field use policy as well. No air horns.
And the last one has to do with noisy motorcycles and cars. I'd thought that what you're supposed to do is try to get the license plate and phone the police. Am I wrong? It's the police that actually govern if somebody's got a terrible muffler or that sort of thing. Is it a city staff issue or more of a police issue when someone complains about a noisy, say, motorcycle?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be characterized as a moving violation for the most part, and we defer to the Kingston Police for enforcement of moving violations. Idling is something that both the police and bylaw enforcement can enforce. So noise from idling, certainly we have the authority to and do enforce that.
Any further questions? Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I have a few questions. The first, I guess, is one of the presentations we had this evening referred to the Ministry of Environment's recommendation of NCP 300. How much has that been taken into consideration in terms of these recommendations going forward? Is that a directive from the Ministry of Environment, or is it something that we're meant to be working toward over time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a directive from the province with respect to some types of noise, noise from stationary sources, for example. So there's provincial regulation with respect to that, quantitative regulations. But it's also, the title is a guideline, and so the province has indicated to municipalities that for types of noise that are not directly spoken to by those regulations or guidelines, that the province is providing for the benefit of the municipalities to take into consideration the information, the research that they've provided in their in that updated set of guidelines. The province originally also provided a model qualitative bylaw, and so many municipalities, including Kingston, adopted that model qualitative bylaw. And it's worked fairly well for us, in our opinion. And so it's not that the province is mandating or even, I would suggest, strongly encouraging municipalities to move towards quantitative. They're just providing that information as evidence and guidelines for municipalities to consider adopting. Basically, it's a customized solution for each municipality.
Okay, so just diving a little bit into that, what are the limitations that are sort of proposed in NCP 300, and what is meant by stationary? So to me, a sports field is stationary, although the use or amount of noise being emitted from it may change over time. And then what is the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and why has that been perceived as more beneficial in the municipality, the qualitative approach?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Stationary source is a good example of that is a mechanical system for a building. So, excuse me, an HVAC system, that type of thing. And we speak to that in the report. That was one of the requests of the council motion, was for us to look more closely at that. So that HVAC systems is probably the best example, but so that's considered stationary. It's a fixed structure, fixed mechanical system. Noise generated at sports fields, I would suggest, would not be considered or classified as a stationary source under the guidelines. It's more typical of a qualitatively regulated type of noise. So to your second question, quantitative refers to decibel readings, so measuring noise by way of an instrument called the decibel reader. And so the volumes that are permissible are established for different types of noise in different environments, rural, urban, that kind of thing. You may recall a delegation previously, Mr. Brown spoke about the waterfront noise levels that could be measured by way of quantitative, and he was proposing a certain decibel threshold. Bylaws that use or rely on quantitative measures to regulate are very strict, black and white. A measurement is taken based, and then it's held up against the threshold that's permitted at a particular location in a community, particular time of day or night. And if it's above that, it's a violation. If it's below it, it's not a violation. What it doesn't, it's not nuanced. It doesn't take into consideration the fact that perhaps nobody is bothered by the noise, even though it's above the threshold, or that it's below the threshold, but actually could be still disturbing to people. So the benefit, and I don't want to represent qualitative as being superior to quantitative in all aspects. There's certainly pros and cons to both. With qualitative, we found that it allows for a person to complain if they're bothered by the noise, but otherwise it allows for the noise to take place if there are no persons who are bothered by it, or that it's not audible to another person. So it might be at a decimal level that in a quantitative bylaw would be considered a violation, but if it's not audible to a person, or if it is audible to a person and they're not bothered by it, then it would not constitute a violation. So it's a much more flexible way of regulating noise, in our opinion, and it also allows the bylaw officer then to exercise a certain amount of discretion. They're not tied to whether it's above or below a certain decibel reading, but in fact they can take all the circumstances into account when determining whether they're going to action that noise complaint and what level of action enforcement they take. So there was a reference earlier, an earlier delegation to officers not being able to enforce noise as it's being proposed that the noise be enforced on sports fields. And I wanted to just take the opportunity to emphasize that the clause that we have inserted, based on public feedback in our earlier consultation, that when it comes to PA announcements at sports fields during organized sporting activity, the volume shall only be loud enough that it is audible to persons at the sports fields, but no louder. So I have a lot of confidence in our bylaw enforcement staff that have a lot of experience with responding to noise calls, that they will be able to respond to a complaint in that circumstance, assess at field level whether the volume is higher than is necessary for the persons present to hear it, and then certainly if they listen at the point of reception where the complainant resides, and then make a determination. And that's a qualitative, that's a good example of a qualitative enforcement of noise bylaw.
Just to follow up on that, I thank you for that. So sort of following along this train of thought with the enforcement then, the hours that we have proposed here for this exemption, which are causing, I think, the most concern, increasing, having consistency of use of fields and noise until 10:30 p.m., an additional 90 minutes. Do we actually have enforcement resources available to assess that? And then as follow-up, how, when the bylaw team assesses and determines that a violation has been made, how do they then approach that infraction in such a way that it is clear to the people making the infraction that there is a that they've overstepped their boundaries and they're actually able to enforce that based on their earlier observation? If the folks on the sports field are disputing the fact, how are they able to then make that determination, even though they've, in a sense, had access to subjective evidence? How are they able to carry through that the fine or the enforcement of the infraction?
Through Mr. Chair, the first part of your question about enforcement coverage, currently noise enforcement is provided by bylaw enforcement officers Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturday evenings from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. I'm just speaking in terms of evening coverage. Of course, there's daytime coverage as well. Outside of those times, there are times when the noise enforcement officers are scheduled outside of those 3 days a week for St. Patrick's Day, Queen's Orientation Week, that kind of thing, homecoming. But outside of those Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it would be the Kingston Police that would respond. The second part of your question was, how would the noise be addressed? So officers would certainly take an education and warning approach unless there had been a pattern or a history of repeated violations in that location or with that particular sports field user, for example, in which case they have the discretion to go straight to a more punitive response, which is the first level of that, which is a provincial offense notice or a ticket that's issued on the spot to the responsible party. So it's a fine that then is required to be paid unless the recipient of the fine chooses to appeal it to court. In addition to that, or I'll back up and say that the officers would make a determination, communicate that the noise is too loud and that it should be lowered to an acceptable level or turned off, as the case may be. If the party responsible for the noise does not comply in the moment, and I think that's what you're getting to, is how effective would this be? That's where a warning can turn into a fine, or that's when an officer would communicate to a party that we've asked you to comply voluntarily. If you choose not to, then there will be an immediate financial consequence, which is usually, not always, but typically an effective approach. Certainly if there's a pattern of violation where the parties disregard bylaw enforcement, or for that matter, the police, we can always bring the police in for added deterrence. Then we can seek a different approach in enforcement, lay a charge, which requires the party to attend court, and we can provide evidence to a justice of the peace and ask for a substantially higher fine to obtain that future compliance.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Councillor Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question has to do with information that would have been gathered throughout this whole process regarding what areas generate the most complaints. I have an idea from reading the material that Woodbine and Michlis McCartney Field are two of those. I was just wondering if that's correct, or if there's other areas, other fields that have been high in the profile as far as where complaints have been generated to date from residents.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We have had complaints about the Power Play Center. They have an exemption, as you're aware, but the complaints often were with respect to types of noise that were not covered by the exemption. I'm aware of complaints that we receive for our own fields, the Woodbine field in particular. Perhaps my colleague can speak more specifically to that, the nature of those complaints and how as the city, we've addressed those. It has been primarily complaints regarding West Campus. I know historically there were some complaints going back a few years with respect to Tyndall Field. And we did receive one complaint, I believe last year at LaSalle High School when they had a Friday night football game.
So it's fair to say that the West Campus, the new field that was described by Mr. Spencer, that was built on top of the parking lot at the corner, now called Michlis McCartney, is the source of the most complaints under the current bylaw?
I think that's fair to say in terms of, relatively speaking, in terms of the scale. I just point out that during the time period of the exemptions for Queens West Campus and Richardson Stadium, there have been very few, if any, I'll say very few complaints for noise that was not covered by the exemption.
Okay, so and then my other question has to do with The
Sorry,
public.
Councillor
Mr. Chair,
Strachan.
can I
Commissioner
just
Hurdle was
add
going
to
to
that?
jump in. My
And
apologies.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that the information that was provided focused primarily in terms of the bylaw response, and that's fair and appropriate. I just want to clarify, though, that the complaints when it comes to fields like Woodbine, or I recall when I was Director of Recreational Services, I used to get a lot of complaints in terms of the ice rink at McBurney Park. Those are not tracked through the bylaw services, and bylaw services do not respond to those because the city is exempted from all of those noise bylaw requirements. So in terms of, so making the statement that that the fields, the Queen's Fields are generating the most complaint is strictly based on the bylaw, the complaints per se. They're not necessarily inclusive of the city field complaints or other types of city amenities like outdoor rinks.
So sort of to clarify what you just said, it's sort of a nature of the fact that it is a field that's not exempt like the city fields are, or like McBurney Arena would have been, so that the noise complaints aren't coming to the same stream of noise bylaw infractions.
Through Mr. Chair, that's correct. Any complaints related to any city fields or amenities are typically directed to the Recreation and Leisure Services Department. So they're not, I mean, the department looks at them and tries to address them, but they're not formally tracked through the same system, and the bylaw officers are not responding directly to those complaints. So I can tell you from experience that Woodbine definitely every year generates a number of complaints from neighbors.
And yeah, and I'm aware of the motorcycle events because of the track that they have there. Okay, so I'm going to change to a different question, the other one that I have, having to do with the public meeting on November 7th. I wasn't able to attend. I know there's a synopsis in the new exhibit. There's two paragraphs. One that talks about, it starts by saying a majority of respondents were supportive of the proposed changes, and the second paragraph that says of those respondents who were not supportive of the proposed changes. So it's divided up like that. I was wondering, in that first group, people that were supportive of the proposed changes, first of all, were respondents at the public meeting asked to identify themselves by address or by having ties to any institution?
Through you, Mr. Chair, could you please clarify the sections you're referring to?
So page 4 of the, it's under the options discussion of the most recent report dated today. So the supplementary report, page 4, it's near the beginning of the package. It's on page 4 of the package. The middle paragraph has a summary of the consultation, the extra consultation that took place since our last meeting, right? And there's a paragraph that starts with a majority of respondents were supportive of the proposed changes, and then there's the next paragraph of those respondents who were not supportive of the proposed changes. So I'm talking about respondents in general. Were they asked to identify themselves by their residence address, and were they asked if they had any ties to any institutions that obviously had a vested interest in the outcome?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So as part of public consultation, we always have sign-in sheets where we ask people that attend the events to identify themselves and their address if they so choose to and some contact information. We don't specifically, through that process, ask for any specific affiliation with an institution or organization, typically, unless they want to provide us with that information.
Right. So there's no way for us here on the committee to know what the motive for supporting or not supporting the bylaw is based by the summary that's in the package. We've heard from a couple of residents of Oak Ridge that obviously totally logically and understandably have been subject to the noise, so they you could assume might be some of the ones who are not supportive of the proposed changes, because that's what they're saying to us here tonight. But it doesn't give us any way of giving any weight to the opposite side, the group that it's just a vague statement that says a majority of respondents were supportive of the proposed changes, but they're not identified in any way, and they could actually all be people that are proponents themselves, that either work for one of the institutions that's going to benefit from the new bylaw. So I'm wondering, it's sort of what we're supposed to do with that paragraph. To me, it doesn't. It appears to be giving a balanced account that there's people on one side, people on the other, and I'm wondering whether that's accurate, because the only thing I've ever heard myself in correspondence, maybe because I'm Sydenham resident and councillor, I've only heard people that are against the changes. I haven't received a single email from anyone that is in favor, other than obviously the ones from the Vice Principal of Queen's.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have the details, as was explained before, in terms of the breakdown, but one thing that I can assure you is that a number of community-based organizations are also in support of this. And I'm not talking about Queen's organization here. I'm talking about groups like Cataraqui Clippers and so on. So where they have organized sports, some for adults, some for children. So there are a number of those organizations that have been involved, as they should, because they are a key stakeholder in this process. So we have not purposely excluded people that wanted to give their opinion. It's been open to everybody that wanted to give an opinion.
Thank you. So is it fair to assume that the majority of respondents that were supportive were representing groups that use the fields or the groups that rent out the fields for profit?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Definitely, there would be some representatives that may have attended sessions that would be from Queen's or St. Lawrence College, or maybe some of the sporting associations in the community. But you know, over the almost 2 years that staff have been working on the noise bylaw, there's been lots of conversations with individuals in the community as well. I can't tell you specifically where their address is, but I think generally what the comment is in the report is of the about 40 people, is that correct? 40 people that attended the last session that we had, the general feeling was that there was a lot of support for the proposed changes that are before you tonight.
This isn't anything official, but I've noticed some serious shaking of heads over in the corner there.
Is that everything, Councillor Stroud? Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, do we have any members of the public with any questions or comments? Mr. Dixon?
Okay, so Frank Dixon with an X. So I want to commend the progress that's been made to get to this stage. And primarily I want to highlight the report by Dr. Lightstone, which is in the package, Environmental Noise Control and Best Practices. So he's done some good work there. And I guess one thing I'd like to see is maybe the possibility of bringing him here to this committee to maybe elaborate further and answer questions. We got a PhD engineer here who's done the work. So that's a massive success in my view. I got a lot of points, but I'm going to come right to my main one. Okay, I've been saying this for months. We've got the best practices examination, and we've got something in the way of a physical quantitative characterization. What we don't have is a connection between the two in Kingston. We don't have any noise readings taken at sports events, right? We know we got a problem. Residents have been talking about this for years. But we can't quantify the problem until we have that data. Seems obvious to me that that's got to take place. So, based on that, I'm going to advocate for deferral of this recommendation until that data is gathered. Otherwise, we're meaningless. We can't know where we are. Okay, so that's the one point. And I'm going to write this up and send it in to the clerk as correspondence. I was making notes as I went and as I was reading the report, but back to following on from some discussion generated by the committee on the enforcement angle. Has there ever been a successful charge laid by bylaw enforcement officers who have access to noise measurement devices in the city of Kingston? That'd be the first question I want answered. Like, do these people have the devices to go out and measure? So if so, has there ever been a successful charge brought forward and a fine paid for violations? We know violations are occurring, right? We hear about it, and we've heard about it before in this committee. Councilors hear about it. So if not, then why not? Because otherwise, really, you're just wasting your time. Okay? Now, one point that I want to add in with respect to Oak Ridge especially, the residents have spoken tonight, is that Oak Ridge is to the east of the West Campus fields, right? And you've often got a prevailing wind blowing from the west or southwest. So it's blowing the wind is blowing the noise towards them. If the wind was the other way, it'd blow the noise toward the west, right? So that's the more established neighborhood. So that hasn't been pointed out. It's sort of part of the physics. And I want to sort of quantify my remarks. I'm a sports person, right? I played sports from age 4 up until last week. And I'm a former varsity athlete at Queen's. And I played for Canada internationally in my sport. So everywhere from playground up to, international level. I'm supportive of sports. I think it's a very important part of our everyday life and culture. But what I'm not supportive of is the need to create loud, amplified noise to have a successful recreational amateur sports event. I didn't have that growing up, and I didn't miss it. Now we have the technology to create it, but I don't see a need, an absolute, essential requirement for that to be involved to have the event be a success. So I would go along with the time limitation and also the noise actual quantity limitation, which, again, it's the big mystery. It's kind of like the box in the room or in the closet that we don't know about. So until you have that, really, you can't make a proper decision without that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Do we have any further comments from community members? Sorry. Do we have a response from staff, primarily regards to enforcement and the other comments that were being made? Mr. McLean.
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, bylaw enforcement has not laid a charge using quantitative sound measurements derived from a decibel reader as evidence. It's always been an officer's testimony or evidence based on qualitative assessment of the volume as being audible and at the point of reception. Back originally when Queens submitted a request for the original noise exemption at the West Campus, one of the conditions was that they prepare a study or conduct a study on noise. So I believe there were some quantitative noise measurements taken by the consultant that they had conduct that study. The recommendations coming out of that study, I recall, were that noise mitigation measures like a burn, for example, would not be effective. I don't want to speak further to that because I'm speaking from memory, but I think there was, in fact, some quantitative measurements taken with respect to noise from the Queens West campus fields.
Thank you. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Schell, and seconded by Councillor Allen. That it be recommended to Council that the draft bylaws attached as Exhibit D, Exhibit E, Exhibit F to the report number AP 17-005 to amend bylaw number 2004-52, a bylaw to regulate noise as amended, be approved. Any deliberation? Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. So, and thanks to all my colleagues for the excellent questions, and to staff for the responses, and to the community members who came and presented. So I think it's clear we can all agree on the basic facts of the situation. We have a legitimate attempt by staff to harmonize the bylaws and level the playing field, no pun intended, to have a comprehensive bylaw that would apply to all the fields and that would be applied and dealt with equally. That I think we can agree on that that's a legitimate intent. And then we have a field that's been created in the last few years on West Campus, which has been the source of many complaints in my district since that time, and also in Councillor Schell's to a lesser extent. We had one aspect of the complaint was the light pollution, which was actually dealt with by the university when they installed the light hoods on the lights there. So that showed willingness to compromise. But essentially, we're still stuck in a situation where we've got two sides, and I would really like to find a compromise. I think that's the opportunity that we're faced with right now. Is where is there a compromise? Where is it? And of the presentations we heard today, there was the first one suggested a couple of ways to compromise: mitigation measures for sound, which was also mentioned by the second delegation. Installing some kind of sound barrier, especially with Mr. Dixon's point about the prevailing winds. That's absolutely part, and I think that's actually a huge part of why things are so loud at Oak Ridge from that field, because the wind is usually blowing the sound across, but also the proximity. You wonder why it is that the noise from that field is so bothersome, and the noise from the traffic, which is closer than the field, never seems to be a cause for concern. And I think you have to think about that to put Mr. McLean's comments into context about the qualitative enforcement, because the nature of disturbing sound is qualitative, not quantitative. You can be sleeping and a fan going beside you it actually helps you sleep, it doesn't stop you sleep. The white noise is actually beneficial, whereas a baby crying might wake you up, right? So in the case of lacrosse sticks banging on goalposts, that might be a very disturbing sound, regardless of the decibel level, as long as it's audible. So that's where the individual bylaw enforcement officer needs to be able to make that judgment call, or the police officer if it's after hours. And I don't think that the university has gone far enough to take these legitimate complaints seriously and look at installing noise mitigation measures. It's obviously done in many other municipalities. And so we're left with a situation where, essentially, to break it all down, you've got a very small minority of residents that happen to be mostly in my district who are very concerned that they're being steamrolled. And you've got, because of that, they don't have the numbers. They will never have the numbers. And if I voted by numbers, I would not even consider supporting their position. But this is a case, to me, it seems like when you break it down, it's a case of bullying. It goes back to when the Queen's Athletic Department spread the social media campaign about Save Our Fields in response to the noise complaints. It was an attempt to silence that minority who was already feeling under the gun by a wave of emails and social media based on the false premise that they were trying to take away the football games at Richardson Stadium. That was wrong. That Save Our Fields campaign was wrong. It was morally repugnant. And I feel like where we are now is the end result of that bullying. The university is attempting to bully the several residents of Oak Ridge who are brave enough to stand up for their own rights. And I will never support bullying in any shape or form, and so I will be voting against this recommendation if I have to, but I prefer to defer it so that we can gather the information, not necessarily the quantitative study that Mr. Dixon was asking for, but the perhaps interaction with the engineer that wrote the consultant's report could come in here and that, together with the best practices from other municipalities, give us some options of something that we could offer these residents in a way showing that we are a government for the people of Kingston and not for the private interests that are attempting to make money on the backs of the people. That's the situation that we're in here, whether you want to admit it or not. And it's my residents that are suffering. And if you vote in favor of this recommendation, you're saying, Councillor Stroud, we don't care about your residents. And I think I didn't want to be put in the situation to have to say that, but if we defer this and we get some more options on the table, then we can perhaps find that compromise, which seems to be staring us in the face that it's totally possible. And if we're forced to pick sides, we will choose the side of the bully. But if we do some more work, we can find a compromise where we can say we did our job and we found the middle ground. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move deferral, if I can get a seconder, of the recommendations so that we can hear from Professor, whatever his name.
I have a seconder from Councillor Bone.
Thank you.
Do you have a time?
Yeah, so I need to write it out. Do I have to write a deferral? Okay, so yeah, maybe you could write it down for me. I would like to defer this to the January Administrative Policies meeting so that we could ask Professor Lighthouse, is it? Lightstone to appear so we could, and for, yeah, so we could have to appear to answer questions regarding his report.
Commissioner Hurdle, would you like to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I just, I know that the proposed deferral is indicated January with a specific guest speaker. I'm just, would like to indicate that we don't know the availability of this person, so if it is formally requested that it be in January, I just want to flag for committee members that if the individual is not available for that date, that may not be feasible. So I just want to bring that up.
So that's legitimate to time. And actually, if I could suggest altering the wording of my deferral to say to defer the recommendation until such time as Professor Lightstone could appear at an Administrative Policies meeting to answer questions about his report. Okay with my seconder? Okay.
Do we have any questions on the amendment? Councillor Osanek, could you take the chair?
I take the chair. I recognize you.
Just a question for staff. Does this have any implications on sports players? Will this defer anything? Are there people warming up in their exercise gear right now that'll have to stop any programming that we have done through the city? Would this limit anyone or anything?
So through Mr. Chair, I'm going to start and look to my colleague to maybe add to this, but my understanding is that Queens is currently making obviously their plans for the next season. So organizations are starting to book their field times and so on. So the ability to have access to the field for that extended time or not would have an impact in terms of their schedule plays and those associations as well. I know that we do have an extension in place and that runs until June. So anything beyond June, either there would be an extension that would be required, or it would have some implications in terms of the scheduling.
Thank you.
I return the chair.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Stroud, would you like to pick a quarter for next year for this to be returned, or would we pick that date?
What staff's recommending, I'm fine. Well, did Commissioner Hurdle indicate that by first quarter 17 would be likely give us enough time to line that up?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we would obviously recommend as soon as possible, and potentially even scheduling a special meeting of Administrative Policies Committee should this expert only be available at certain times.
Does that need to be in the deferral motion, the idea of a special meeting?
The chair has asked that I read the deferral motion again, and just to answer your specific question, the chair of the committee can call a meeting at any time for a special purpose. So the motion as it stands right now, and I'm sorry, I may have missed if you just added a quarter, but if not, just let me know in a second. So the motion as originally presented was defer until such time that the professor can appear to answer questions regarding his report in the Administrative Policies Committee.
Yeah, so I guess we could put in a quarter, or we could leave it like that, and it would be basically as soon as possible is what we're asking for. Maybe I should just add the words as soon as possible to my deferral motion, and that would, I mean, it's going to be first quarter no matter what, because this is the last meeting of this quarter, right? So next quarter would be as soon as possible. So I'd just like to add them as soon as can be arranged, or as soon as possible.
Do we have any questions related to time or place? Seeing none, I'll call to vote. Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Our next item is related to the sign bylaw. I'll ask for an introduction from staff on this report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff conducted a review of the sign bylaw number 2009-140, and the review was conducted, the last time the bylaw was reviewed was 2009. So the bylaw was identified by staff for review as a result of issues arising from new technology in the city, problems with administering and enforcing the bylaw, the regulations, and in response to new types of signs in the community. Staff consulted with stakeholder groups, the Kingston construction industry, the BIA, sign companies, and other stakeholders, as well as public meetings. The public input was sought through websites, newspaper, Facebook, Twitter, and two public meetings, one on December 2nd and one on July 28th. Sorry, just bear with me. We also consulted with other municipalities to determine best practices with our current bylaw and what their proposed amendments were to their bylaws. Most municipalities are proposing new amendments to their bylaws as well. So we consulted them both through what their proposed bylaws were and through phone conversations with the municipalities and why they were proposing the changes that they were proposing.
Thank you. Mrs. Agnew?
Thank you, and through you, just wanted to acknowledge as well that staff did have individual meetings with the delegation that was here this evening, and did have some specific discussions in and around some of the changes that they were requesting. There were some things that we were able to accommodate, but others that we weren't for very specific reasons, and we're happy to take questions on that.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Osanik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through you to staff, is this item time sensitive?
The review of the bylaw hasn't been done since 2009. So there's a lot of changes in technology and changes in the types of signs. So in order to regulate the new types of signs, yeah, it is time sensitive.
And a further question to our clerk. We meet every other month, correct? So are we meeting in January? We wouldn't be, right? It would be again in February? We are meeting? Is this?
So the next scheduled meeting is January 12th, and then the meeting after that, as scheduled, would be in March.
Okay, thank you. So because we're seeing these 6 questions tonight from the delegation, and they seem to be really specific, and we haven't had the benefit to know which ones have been addressed when there was the private meeting with the delegate and not, I'm moving a deferral until the January admin policy meeting where a brief information report addressing these 6 questions provided by the delegation tonight could be at the meeting, and any amendments that might be required from the 6 questions. I don't have that in writing.
Okay. Do I have a seconder for that deferral? Councillor Baum? Question for staff, does that give you enough time?
Yes, absolutely. We can, like I said, because we've met with these individuals, we're very familiar with the questions that are in here, but are happy to put together that information report to provide some greater detail as to the rationale behind the bylaw that you see before you tonight, and where we were able to address and where we weren't. So we're happy to do that for January 12th.
Okay. Any questions regarding time or place? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. Those in favor? Those opposed? That passes. Okay. If the committee consents, we'll hear comments from the public. The way it had panned out kind of dovetailed around committee, or public conversation, but if I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, so I would advise that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of council, city staff. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of council, city staff, members of the public. My name is Paul Martin. I operate 4 mini storage warehouses here in the city of Kingston. Signage for a business is extremely important. I've read through your city bylaw many, many times on signage. I find it very, very confusing, very complicated, very cumbersome. I know I won't understand the full aspects of what's in this until I actually apply for something and find out that it won't work. The one I'm here to talk about tonight is I have been allowed, because the definition of a self-storage facility is defined as a place where you rent space to customers. What's happened here is the city bylaw committee or staff have put an exemption where they talk about real estate signs. They're allowed as long as they either have a property for sale or they have a property for lease. And I've always been able to put up a sign because we're leasing our own private space to customers. And now they've put an exemption in where they don't allow anyone that operates a self-storage facility to operate under this same real estate sign scenario. And I guess I find it very discriminatory that I've got space for lease, the same as any other commercial or industrial operation, and our definitions are identical, but yet because it's being called self-storage, I'm no longer allowed because of the definitions that are being put in here. And I don't think that's fair.
Do we have any comments from staff?
Thank you, and through you, what I could suggest, since the motion has been deferred and we will be coming back with an information report, that we are happy to further expand upon Mr. Martin's concerns are related to the bylaw for the committee's consideration.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
We have another member of the public who'd like to speak. Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. I think there's been some excellent work done on this, so I want to commend the staff for their dedication. The one point I have refers to page 245, item number L. So it's talking about height for the size of a sign. So it just says define height to mean the vertical distance between grade and the highest point of the sign or sign structure. It doesn't talk about the width of a sign. Right? So I'm sort of looking at, well, how big can a sign be? One I noticed a little while ago was on Princess, which is advertising a forthcoming real estate development. It's around Nelson Street. The sign has got to be 30 feet across, right? And it's close to the sidewalk, and it's probably 15 feet high. So I'm just wondering if we can look at, what the overall size of the sign should be. You're talking about height, but just the width is also seems to be needed. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. No other comments? Okay, so moving on to business item D, I'll ask for a introduction from staff for revisions to the private property parking bylaw, request for delegated authority. Mr. Sample? Oh, Mr. McLean, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We are bringing to the committee tonight a report that requests a number of amendments to what's commonly referred to as the private property parking bylaw, bylaw 99-166. It's a harmonized bylaw of the City of Kingston. It does also, as you'll notice from the rather long title for the bylaw, speak to parking enforcement on city properties. So just to differentiate that refers to properties that are off-street but are not operated as a municipal parking lot. So for example, the parking lot at Artillery Park or in the Invista Center would be captured under this. But predominantly, the purpose of the bylaw is to provide for parking on private property by persons appointed through authority by council to issue City of Kingston tickets. There are a number of housekeeping matters that we are proposing to be updated or amended in this bylaw. We are also proposing that a more rigorous set of criteria be applied to those persons who make application to have authority from council to issue city parking tickets on their respective private properties. And that's based on best practices from other municipalities and includes setting a minimum age of 18 years, requesting that a CPIC criminal records check be provided, satisfactory to the city, and that a person who receives the orientation that we provide on how to issue a parking ticket successfully completes that, passes that orientation. The third aspect that we're making a recommendation on is that we're seeking delegated authority to a senior staff employee to be able to make these appointments under the bylaw to, first of all, allow properties that the property owners to make application to have city tickets issued on their property, to authorize the execution of agreements between the city and that property owner, and then secondly, to appoint the specific individuals who the property owner puts forward to be able to issue the tickets. This is, as you may have seen over the years, reports and communications to council come before council on a fairly regular basis, and it's been treated as a somewhat routine process. In fact, the city's delegation power duties policy characterizes it as a routine administrative power that can be delegated to staff. Several municipalities have gone down this road, seen the benefits. They're in the same boat as Kingston, where they're providing for enforcement of parking on private property by way of appointment, and they all are experiencing the same burden, so to speak, of having to administer this process by preparing reports for council approval. So we're looking to streamline that process, make it much more expeditious, because we won't have to, we won't be encumbered, so to speak, by the timelines for submission of reports and to council. And then we're taking that also off council's agenda. We are, however, at the same time proposing that there be accountability from staff to council. And so there are conditions that are a part of this set of recommendations, and also the request that council direct staff to report out annually on all the agreements that have been executed and all the persons that have been appointed. So we'll be very much transparent with this, and the list that is now forms the schedule in bylaw 99-166 that numbers several hundred names. We're proposing that that be removed from the bylaw because it would no longer be council appointing those individuals, but that list be retained as a public record for anyone to access, and that the director would be responsible. So the director of transportation services would be the city employee who would have the delegated authority, or his or her designate.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. So let me get this straight. So we've been writing bylaws every year with specific names of individuals that are given the authority to write tickets. And every year it changes depending on who is administering those private lots. And each time it's a new bylaw, or the bylaw is updated, I guess. And you're saying we should use delegated authority to do this and remove those names from the bylaw. The question is, what part of the delegated authority bylaw doesn't allow us to do this without council approval? Like, why do we need this recommendation, and why does it need council approval under the delegated authority bylaw that we already have? Because it seems to me that parking tickets don't meet the threshold for what can be delegated. So I guess what I'm asking is why can't you guys just go ahead and make this a delegated authority without asking us?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is that requirement to transfer the authority, so to speak, from council, because the default position is that under the Municipal Act and the Police Services Act, municipalities, by way of their council, have authority to regulate parking on private property. So it would be a one-time formal delegation from council to staff. The names and the properties that have been authorized to date, despite the fact that we're requesting that schedule listing those names and properties be removed, we are also stating in the bylaw that they will continue to be recognized, their status as having been appointed by council, subject to any future decision by the delegated authority to revoke or revise. So it's, we do need the authority of council under our delegation of powers bylaw. It's not, it is something that requires a bylaw to delegate the authority.
Thank you. And you mentioned just at the end there that if the situation changed, we could amend the bylaw to change the delegated, like if someone else needed to be delegated or something like that, we could do that easily with an amendment?
Through you, Mr. Chair. If council deemed it appropriate that another person other than the Director of Transportation be the appropriate person to exercise that delegated authority, then certainly I imagine staff would facilitate that process. We also mentioned in the bylaw amendments that if a person requests appointment and is turned down or refused by the Director of Transportation, in this case, holding the delegated authority, that person would still retain the option to make their representation directly to council. Staff would, of course, have an opinion on that and provide council with it at that time.
Sorry, so are you suggesting then that council could overrule the delegated authority on a one-time basis if someone came and appealed to council?
Yes.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll ask for question or comments from members of the public. Seeing none, I will see if we have a mover for the recommendation. Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Stroud. Okay. Do we have any deliberation? Councillor Allen.
Just very quickly, I'm just going to point out to the committee that this is eliminating red tape and speeding up a process that community partners rely upon us for. So I thank staff for bringing this forward. I think it's a great idea, and anything to reduce this sort of bureaucratic burden that we sometimes place on our partners is fantastic. So thank you.
We do that? We don't do that. Any further deliberation? Seeing none, I'll call to vote. Those in favor? Those opposed? That passes. Moving on to item E, I'll ask for an introduction from staff. City of Kingston video surveillance policy updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're very pleased to be here once again to talk about the city video surveillance policy. Last time we were here was December 10th, 2015. And really, the short end of this particular report is that we talk about changes to Appendix D, and we also talk about the number of times the police have requested a copy of this information. So, sorry, somebody just came up here. So the changes to the policy are a couple of housekeeping amendments. The address for Artillery Park has been changed from Ordnance Street to Baggett Street, the Harold Harvey Arena, that's been deleted. We've also added a few properties, the old City Yard Vehicle and Equipment Storage Facility on Division Street, the Provincial Offences Court on Montreal Street, and the Grand Theatre on Princess Street has been added. So all these properties are currently under the video surveillance. FIPA permits the Kingston Police to access the city's video surveillance recordings when they require these for their investigations. Since November 2015, I can confirm that the police have requested to review the video surveillance recordings approximately 13 times. So that's just the nuts and bolts of the report, but I do have Blair here, Blair Johnson with me, city's corporate records and information officer. I'm just gonna ask him to give a brief presentation on what the video surveillance policy is all about.
Through the chair, sorry. Through the chair, when the council members were going through their orientation, I spoke about the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So this legislation governs how the city collects, uses, and discloses of records. Video surveillance is creating a record. So the video that it's capturing is a record that has personal information. So the Information and Privacy Commissioner, this is an independent body that oversees and makes sure that the city is acting in compliance with MFIPA. They want to make sure that we are in compliance with the legislation, that we're handling the collection, use, and disclosure of the records appropriately. So the IPC has come out with guidelines on how municipalities and other agencies should be collecting this information, should be using it, should be disclosing it, and what they should do. So parts of that would be signage. So anywhere that the city has video surveillance up, the city should have signage up that shows that that alerts the members of the public that they are under video surveillance, that provides them with the reasons why there is video surveillance there and who to contact if they have any questions. So when we came to the committee in 2009 with the policy, we were asked to come back on an annual basis and provide an update anytime we've had updates with the policy, as well as provide the number of times police have made requests. So that's basically the background with respect to this policy. Do I have any questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, I'll ask any community members if they have any comments. Seeing none as well. This is an information report, so I will take it as received. Moving on to business item F, annual report of city bylaws. Do I have a introduction from staff on this report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, we're so pleased to be here. In 2011, City Council developed an annual process of identifying, listing, and reviewing the bylaws, which might be considered obsolete or in need of being updated. The inventory that you have before you is updated annually and provided to the committee as an information report. So this report that you have in front of you provides a listing of all the bylaws which were reviewed in 2016, as well as those that are targeted for 2017. Just to briefly go into a couple of highlights there. In 2016, we took a look at 27 bylaws as part of the inventory. Of this, we completed 15, and the ones that have not been completed have been moved forward into 2017. But an important thing to note is that we also brought forward a consolidation of the powers and duties bylaw as part of a review undertaken by our department, and as part of that review, we reviewed 43 additional bylaws. So in reality, we reviewed approximately 58 bylaws in 2016. And that was really a challenge that the CEO put before us. He wanted us to put rigor into the process, and we did. And what I'd like to acknowledge is that that particular process was led by Janet James, our new Deputy City Clerk, and we're proud of what we have in front of us. And we're here to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from the committee? Councillor Allen.
Just very briefly, in the inventory, two that stand out for me, and I'm glad to see that the bylaw 2006-118, bylaw respecting the Kingston public market is going to be taking place very soon. As we have a more popular public space that shares the historic market space, we're finding more and more conflicts coming up between that historical use and uses for festivals and concerts and so forth. So we need to find a way to make sure that we're respecting all the users of the popular public space out back here, and it's great. So I just wanted to highlight that I was pleased with that. The one I'm not pleased with is the refreshment vehicle policy one, which is later in the year. It means we're going to miss another season that would be great for these businesses. I guess we're probably too late anyways, because by the time the regulatory framework would be in place, they wouldn't have purchased or planned anything for 2017 at this point anyway. They need to start planning for 2018. So the sooner we get that done, the better. I think it's an essential form of entrepreneurism that we want to encourage when we have such high values on local food, food policies, food experiences, and being open for business. And refreshment vehicles kind of fit all of those priorities of council. So those are just two comments I just thought I'd make.
Thank you. Any further comments from the committee? Seeing none, sorry, Councillor Stratt.
Sorry, this shouldn't take long, but two of the items are the ones that we deferred today. So, and it says in the margin complete. The work on the bylaws is complete regardless of the deferral, I guess. So that's
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other comments, this is also an information report, so I'll acknowledge it as received. We have no other motions, no notices of motion, no other business, no correspondence. The date and time of our next meeting is scheduled for January 12th, 2017, and I would look for a motion for adjournment. Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Shaw. All in favor?